Constitutional factors aside, all of this seems fine. However, in practice, a state of affairs is implied which a treatment facility, in the absence of a criminal charge, is really unable to impose. Namely, a capacity to detain large numbers of individuals who are without psychosis and capable of significant antisocial behavior against their will. The point in question is not simply one of how much muscle a narcotic unit must include in its structure to obstruct elopements. Rather, it once again becomes a matter of whether, under such circumstances, a therapeutic milieu in which a hospital rather than a prison environment prevails may be established. Our experience would suggest that all too frequently, the narcotic addict who, without further legal entanglements, is certified to a hospital for a period of confinement which exceeds his own desires, soon finds a pattern of behavior which is inconsistent with this goal. In doing so, he precipitates his release and thereby defeats the certification procedure. If released to aftercare under such an arrangement, he not infrequently has lost the contact. Needless to say, we do not plan to use this section of the law to any great extent, but instead will seek to build our commitment program on the two procedures previously described. As has been implied by the comments which have been made thus far, the provisions of the Metcalfe-Volcker Law do not represent a complete departure from the activity in which the New York State Department of Mental Hygiene had been participating prior to its passage. In fact, it should be emphasized that the experience of the three units which had evolved since 1959 to no small degree allowed the department representatives who participated in the development of this law to contribute meaningfully in the creation of its provisions. Thus, the importance of pursuing a course of clinical and basic scientific research had been recognized with the establishment of the department's first narcotic unit at the Manhattan State Hospital. Addicts have also been admitted to our facilities under varying conditions, allowing for an evaluation of the effect of outside pressure on the treatment process, particularly as provided by the State Division of Parole and local probation departments. Furthermore, representatives of these facilities have made themselves available for the education of nurses, social workers, physicians, and psychologists by participating in formal training programs and scientific meetings. Similarly, they have participated in planning sessions with the representatives of other agencies, both public and private, and have conducted an aftercare program. They have also explored the state of present knowledge as to causative factors and what constitutes appropriate treatment modalities, are aware of the kinds of facilities which are required to treat the addict, are familiar with the social and legal issues which surround this problem, and in general have acquired a fundamental understanding of drug addiction as a clinical entity. However, it would be incorrect to suggest that following the passage of this law, much did not remain to be done to implement its provisions, for it called for a much broader field of action than had been previously initiated, making it necessary to take those steps which would allow for the development of a more comprehensive program. These included the appointment of a special assistant to the commissioner to direct the newly created narcotic office established by the law within the State Department of Mental Hygiene, the appointment of 9 citizens at large to serve on the Advisory Council on Drug Addiction, the creation of a male and female adolescent unit, the establishment of a facility for adult females, an increase in the number of beds available to adult males, an expansion of the department's aftercare facilities, the employment and training of an expanded personnel force, and the development of a screening staff familiar with prison methods whose function it would be to select arrested addicts suitable for inclusion in the program. Movement in the direction of taking these steps, which represent the initial goals of the department's expanded program, began shortly after the close of the 1962 legislative session, at which time a division of narcotics within the State Department of Mental Hygiene was established and a director appointed to coordinate the department's operations in the narcotic field. Simultaneously, a study was initiated within a major New York City detention facility so that some impressions could be gained as to the numbers and types of cases a source such as this would be likely to yield under the provisions of the Arrested Narcotic Commitment Act. This allowed for a random sampling of some 400 individuals who were interviewed over a 5-month period following their arraignment in magistrate's court and classification by the detention facility as narcotic addicts. The techniques utilized by this institution in the processing and management of addict defendants was also reviewed, and an opportunity to familiarize hospital personnel with these methods was provided. As a result, the development of administrative procedures to be followed by local correction departments under the provisions of the new law was facilitated, and an opportunity to train personnel in the screening of arrested drug addicts was made possible. Movement in the direction of establishing a unit for the treatment of the male adolescent addict was also begun shortly after the passage of the law. Thus, at the Manhattan State Hospital, where the clinical research facilities and basic science laboratories have been maintained in temporary quarters, pending the nearing completion of $1 million reconstruction job of the edifice which will house them, plans were laid to redesign still another building to be used in the treatment and rehabilitation of the youthful drug user. This structure, which it is anticipated will service 135 patients, will include space to meet the educational, training, and recreational needs of this group. Pending the completion of construction changes, temporary quarters were made available which allowed the Manhattan State Hospital to begin treating patients under the age of 21 in October of 1962, thereby permitting this institution to run a short-term pilot project designed to smooth out the kinks in this operation prior to its formal entry into the adolescent field on January 1st, 1963. Some 55 of the 135 planned adolescent beds have been added thus far to the 55 adult beds which previously existed at this hospital, and it is hoped that the remainder can be phased in during the next 3 or 4 months. The appointment of 9 members from outside of state government to the newly created Council on Drug Addiction on September 4th, 1962, represented another step in getting the program moving along. Designating the Executive Vice President of the State Medical Society as the Council's chairman, the governor appointed a group of qualified and sympathetically interested persons, including a psychiatrist, a judge, the executive director of a social agency, a prosecuting attorney, and 3 clergymen, 2 of whom had worked actively in the drug addiction field. The entire council met for the first time in November of 1962 and is presently meeting on a monthly basis in the pursuit of its work. In September of 1962, still another step was taken in the program's favor, with the selection of 3 sites to allow for an expansion of the department's inpatient facilities for adult males and the establishment of a unit for the treatment of adolescent and adult females. These new facilities, representing a total of 165 beds, are distributed as follows: 25 adult male beds at the Buffalo State Hospital, 35 beds for females at the Middletown State Hospital, and 105 beds for adult males at the Pilgrim State Hospital. These units began receiving patients on January 1st, 1963, and should be completely phased in by July 1. It is anticipated, therefore, that with the 20 beds at the Utica State Hospital and the 80 beds at the Central Islip State Hospital, the total bed capacity of the department will number 455 by midsummer. A further step in the direction of evolving the program was taken later in the year with the decision to establish the first aftercare clinic detached from an institution with a drug unit in the City of New York's borough of Manhattan. This clinic is scheduled to open shortly and will supplement the work being done at the Manhattan State Hospital's outpatient department. As was the case with the previously existing units, all of the new facilities offer aftercare services to those patients who originate in areas close to them. However, we draw the overwhelming majority of our patients from New York City, and it is anticipated that at least a second clinic will be required in this municipality as the program develops. All of this reflects the stress which will be placed upon following patients once they have returned to the community. It is our hope that this work will be facilitated by the committed status of many of our patients and will allow for a coordinated use of community resources in an effort to assist them to higher level functioning. The matter of meeting the personnel needs of our program has also been actively pursued. Experience has taught us that the number of people required to deal effectively with the drug addict patient far exceeds the usual staffing patterns as they are applied to the general state hospital population. This is particularly true in the area of ward personnel, where I might add a significant number of individuals must be of high caliber and equipped to deal with the characterological problems which the addict presents. Similarly, the presence of spirited persons representing the disciplines of recreation, vocational training, occupational therapy, and education to lead a patient group lacking in direction is a prime requisite, as is an adequate number of psychiatrists, psychologists, and caseworkers to plan with the addict in anticipation of his return to the community and to provide him with the support and supervision he requires after he leaves inpatient care. In this regard, the training of new personnel began at the Manhattan State Hospital during the spring of 1962. A nucleus of people from each of the new units enumerated was subsequently included in this training program, and they in turn are providing instruction to those individuals who have been added to their staffs. This is an ongoing process which will not be completed overnight, but it is our hope that in this manner, a group of workers upon whose shoulders this program can securely rest will be developed. To summarize, the New York State Department of Mental Hygiene's narcotic addiction program, which began in August of 1959, is presently in a transition stage as it moves in the direction of a broadened and more active role in the drug addiction field. A new law which serves as a basis for this activity has been described, and the initial steps taken to implement the provisions of this statute have been reviewed. The department's program, as it is presently envisioned, seeks to meet the need for a coordinated psychiatric effort in the narcotic addiction field on the state level and will provide an opportunity for long-term treatment to voluntary and civilly committed patients while pursuing an active course of clinical and basic scientific research in an effort to improve treatment results. As such, it should not be expected to melt the drug addiction problem away, but rather should be viewed as adding another dimension to those approaches which others in the New York area, and for that matter elsewhere in the country, are making to a complex clinical entity which leans towards chronicity and tends to resist intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mazelos. We are running somewhat behind time, so I will have to ask our distinguished consultant panel to please be brief. I'm going to call first on Professor Allen from the School of Law, University of Michigan, calling him first because both the programs we've just heard have a basis in law, so I'd like to hear what he has to say about it.
Some years ago, a book appeared by an English essayist entitled 2 Cheers for Democracy. 2, not 3, indicating that there was some reservation about the grounds for cheery prognostications about the democratic way of life. I suppose my reaction to what has been said this afternoon about the California and New York programs might be said 1 cheer for the programs described in these 2 excellent papers. I think there is basis for cheer in the fact that these programs in the 2 most populous states certainly indicate that we have entered into an era, probably irreversibly into an era, in which the regime of the old punitive assumptions is bound to be challenged and challenged more effectively. It would seem to me quite clear that these new programs cannot help but contribute something to knowledge, even though this may in some cases be negative knowledge. It is also true that these programs indicate that the area is in ferment, that ideas are now being talked about right out in public about the narcotics area. One notes, for example, the reference to the parole experiments and the halfway house devices and the like. Now, I am not a therapist. It would be presumptuous of me to attempt to evaluate these programs in therapeutic terms. I have, however, spent most of my professional life in a study of the problems of the imposition of the public force on individuals for the purpose of attaining or attempting to attain community objectives. And I must confess that I still am somewhat concerned by this frame of reference in approaching the description of these 2 systems. I shall not repeat what I have already said at this conference about the problems, those particularly involving the device of civil commitment. I did indicate in general that it seems to me that there are certain characteristic tendencies here that have got to be guarded against. I must say it seems to me quite clear that this kind of approach is part of the wave of the future. That is, having the two most populous states embark on programs of this kind make it almost inevitable that this example will be followed in other jurisdictions. But it does seem to me that it is appropriate to suggest that there are certain kinds of characteristic problems and that they ought to be attended to. I indicated yesterday that one of the characteristic tendencies in the civil commitment device, at least in other areas, is a tendency for such commitments to serve incapacitative rather than rehabilitative purposes, despite the best will in the world and public representations to the contrary. The reason for this is very simple. It is that regardless of what advances have occurred in medical and behavioral science, it is still true that the state is more efficient in locking people up than therapists are in curing them. So that there is always a tendency for incapacitation to exceed the capacities of therapy. Now, Mr. McGee indicates that as far as he is concerned, he does not believe that the addict has any superior status to, say, the TB patient or to the leper with reference to rights of liberty. And I would agree that perhaps this is not the best way to approach the problem. At least I would not argue this in terms of the rights of the addict at the moment. But I do suggest that the addict commitment problem has at least two distinguishing characteristics from the examples that he put. Number one, we may have more secure confidence in the state of the art with reference to therapy in those areas. Number two, commitment with reference to TB and leprosy is not, at this time at least, an integral part of a larger legal operation which still maintains a very large element of punitive repression. And it seems to me that the concern with rights in this area may not be wholly unrealistic. I think one of the most interesting points made by Dr. Mazalis relates to the commitment problems where there are no legal strings attached to the person committed. He indicates that a better therapeutic milieu may be established if the committed person is subject to the alternative of criminal prosecution in the one case or the imposition of criminal penalties after conviction in the other. I think one of the problems here is, and I certainly do not charge the New York program with this, that in these programs there is always a tendency to equate the needs of the institution with the needs of therapy. I have seen situations, Mr. McGee mentioned a case of this kind, in which the institution, which is basically rehabilitative in character, is very much concerned with the problems of custody and a very strong tendency toward self-deception in this regard. That is to say, a very strong tendency to say that what we are doing here really serves a therapeutic function, when it would appear rather clear that it is the objective of keeping the people in and keeping them quiet that is being served. For example, I know an institution for the therapy of disturbed children which has a cell for solitary confinement. That's what it is. It's interesting to note that that cell is described as the quiet room in that institution. I think there are these tendencies. I do not argue that the tendencies must always prevail. What I'm saying is that my cheers are only one. I am still concerned. I would like to be persuaded that there are no problems. I am yet to be persuaded.
I think I'll call next on Dr. Isadorachine, give us a sociological view on these two treatment programs.
Professor Allen has just expressed exactly what I wanted to say, and I suspect much more articulately than I could. Perhaps I would want to make sure to add that although I echo the one cheer, it is a very faint echo. Mr. McGee has, at a number of points, suggested that the label isn't the issue. It doesn't make any difference, he said, whether you call the treatment program therapeutic or punitive. The important thing is what the program is. And it doesn't make very much difference whether you call addiction a crime or a disease. The important thing is what you do about it. I would agree that the label is often misrepresentative. It's often deceptive. I think that this is true of much of the current enthusiasm about commitment procedures. In some instances, I am sure, I'm utterly confident with regard to Messrs. Metcalf and Volcker, because I know something of their career in the New York legislature, that these are completely honest and well-intentioned with regard to providing what they think is a rational program. I have, however, heard some of the enthusiasm for the commitment procedure put in terms of which I take a very, very dim view. For instance, at the White House Conference on Narcotics and Drug Abuse, I heard one district attorney say in almost these words, we know that addicts are going to commit crimes, and to protect the public, we've got to lock them up. Now, it doesn't make any difference whether it's going in the, basically, it doesn't make any difference whether it's going to help them or not. The public has to be protected. And in effect, if I heard him at all correctly, he was saying, under criminal law, we cannot lock somebody up for crimes that he is going to commit. So let us declare this to be a disease, a dangerous social disease, and let us lock him up for the crimes that they're going to commit. And what's more, let the hospitals get overcrowded rather than the jails. This kind of an attitude I've heard, and I take a very dim view of it. Actually, if one confronts the question of whether locking these individuals up in a hospital is calculated to do them any good or to do society any good, one has to raise some eyebrows and wonder, is it a rational program? Mr. McGee quoted the Supreme Court as saying, in effect, that it's permissible for, under the law, to prescribe treatment if this is necessary for the protection of society. I'm not a lawyer. I do not know what legal considerations are, but as a simple matter of common sense, it would seem to me that this kind of a proposition is predicated on two assumptions. One is that there is a real danger to society which requires the prescription of a treatment, and the other is that the treatment is rationally directed at the condition which is being treated. If there were a real danger to society, let us say, from venereal disease, and the legislature prescribed that everybody suffering from venereal disease must eat a quart of sour cream a day, I suspect there would be an outcry. that this is an abuse of the law. And it's exactly in the same way that we must look at the questions of commitment. There are two big limitations. One is kind of pointed up by Mr. McGee's proposition that the addict is no more entitled to determine for himself whether he needs treatment than is the tubercular. This may be true, but he is entitled to have a treatment which is directed at his condition. And he's entitled to not to be subjected to treatment which is calculated not to improve his condition. If this man in the hospital, well, let me put the matter this way. Tuberculosis, I think, can be treated by chemicals. Psychological disturbances cannot be treated by chemicals. Let me not make that complete generalization. I don't know of any treatment for the kinds of psychological disturbances that go along with drug addiction that can be treated by chemicals other than by giving them these self-same drugs or some equivalent. Now, to provide psychotherapy, a person has to be ready for it. The addict typically has the best alibi in the world for not being ready for it. He's got a monkey on his back. I'm not sick, he can tell you. It's just this monkey on my back. There's some ego-alien object which has invaded me. All you've got to do is to get me rid of the condition. He has to have the experience of failing, and failing in the context, perhaps, of a most primitive or subsequent to a most primitive kind of therapeutic relationship, to enable you to take another step with him and say to him, now why on earth, if there was nothing wrong with you, why did you fall back? At this point, he's going to tell you that he's got bad companions. And so comes a point you can't talk any further, you send him out again. He's going to come back. And you say, now why are you back now? Why don't you stay away from your bad companions? And he'll find some other alibi. A basic condition for psychotherapy is that an individual has to feel sick. And simply locking him up and saying to him you are sick does not mean that he is ready for treatment. Now there's another factor which is involved in these commitment programs which I think one has to consider in relation to the nature of this disturbance. And that is that so many addicts are, in fact, as has so frequently been noted in the course of this conference, in one sense or another, passive dependent personalities. Within the framework of a hospital routine, they are apt to get along extremely well. But this is exactly the kind of behavior that a passive dependent personality should be exhibiting in a well-ordered kind of institution. Consequently, there is utterly nothing happening to him to change him. That is, the milieu which is supposed to be therapeutic is not a therapeutic milieu. It's simply a milieu which enables him to function within his limitations in exactly the same way as in the outside, free, open environment. The drug so often enables him to function within his limitations. Now, it so happens that you find some individuals who have enough ego function, enough gumption left, enough of a lack of dependency left to fight back. These are precisely the guys that you say don't belong in the institution, because the institution, you have to consider your furniture. Well, maybe this is all right for some individual. One final point I would like to call attention to is in connection with Dr. Meiselas' paper. The very large part of it, which was devoted to an explanation of how many individuals who are involved with narcotics become ineligible for treatment for reasons that are, in the great majority of cases, as far as I can see, totally irrelevant to their condition.
Going to call next on Dr. Fred Maddox, who's had a great deal of experience in trying to manage addicts and trying to help them within an institutional framework. Can you do it in 2 minutes, Fred?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Dr. Mysalis and Mr. McGee, for the overviews of the progressive programs developing in California and New York. I wish to give 2.5 cheers for these programs. And I'll respond not in accordance to some things I had jotted down here, but partly to the two previous discussants, because I did have something here along the lines of what they proposed. I'll acknowledge that civil commitment in and of itself may not help a great deal unless some kind of treatment or rehabilitative activity is established to occur following commitment. I do want to underline the comment that Mr. McGee made, that a departmental label doesn't necessarily make a program therapeutic or punitive. That in goal, at least, modern correctional facilities have the object not of punishment but of rehabilitation, and similarly mental hospitals have the goal of treatment and rehabilitation. So I don't see much difference in the expressed goals. And I don't see also that custody and therapy are necessarily antithetical, that some people seem to become socially helpless, maybe socially dangerous in regard to drug use, and some develop psychoses which make them socially helpless and maybe dangerous, and some may have tuberculosis which makes them socially helpless and dangerous, and if they have lost control of themselves and can't manage their own illnesses and can't seek treatment, it seems to me that the concerned and humanitarian society around them may have to take them into custody and try to do something for them. Some mentally ill patients who remain helpless and perhaps dangerous will try to run away from the institution, and it seems to me that the institution is failing in its purpose if it doesn't try to keep custody of these persons. I would question the view as stated by Mr. McGee, not his privilege of having the view, but the usefulness of the view already quoted by Dr. Chine, that the addict is no more entitled to determine for himself whether he should undertake treatment than the tubercular is entitled to make such a determination. I may be wrong, but because I haven't been in contact with public health practice much in the last few years, but I think most tuberculosis patients voluntarily seek and use treatment. And as long as they do, there's no need, it seems to me, for the courts or for the health agencies or for society in general to be concerned about itself then determining whether treatment will be given. And in this connection, some addicted persons seem to be able to seek and use treatment effectively. we guess that maybe 15% of the voluntary admissions to Lexington and Fort Worth will stay in the hospital and make some effort to participate actively in treatment. I'm almost through, and you say I have a minute more?
Not if you're through.
Gee. Well, my point here is that we are again in danger of making some incorrect and less than useful statements when we attempt to generalize about the addict and what he needs. Persons who become addicted to drugs vary widely in their educational and vocational status and their motivations and their personality configurations. And maybe some of them need some outpatient psychotherapy. Some of the published reports suggest that patients can get off drugs just while receiving psychotherapy. Some may need brief hospitalization, which they accept voluntarily. And others, in my notion, can be helped only by imposition of at least temporary external controls.
I'd like to call last on Dr. John O'Donnell, who I think has a little special knowledge about what may happen to at least some people who have been institutionalized.
He doesn't have to warn me to hold it to 2 minutes because I work for him. I'd like to take only one point here. These programs sound very similar. They both involve legal compulsion, institutional treatment, then aftercare services, and built-in research. No element is new, but the combination is new. Despite this, I think there may be some very real differences between these programs as they develop. This may not be because one is under the Department of Mental Hygiene and the other under the Department of Corrections. It's interesting to those who like coincidences that all four of us seem to have checked at least 3 quotations from these papers in common. The department labels don't make a difference, but I think you can see differences between the 2 papers. For example, on the viewpoint of motivation, Mr. McGee's already quoted statement that it's simply not for the addict to decide whether or not he will accept treatment. Dr. Misalis, on the other hand, was disturbed a little about the motives for which voluntary patients appeared for treatment. They came to clean up for a court appearance or to get welfare for the wife or because of family pressure, rather than, and he implies this is what he would have preferred, any real desire to attempt to find inner peace and pleasurable living in the absence of narcotics. Then a few pages later he comes back and he talks about the little interest they demonstrate in outpatient treatment. And a few pages later, when he's talking about court certification, he's troubled by the problem of establishing a therapeutic milieu in which a hospital rather than the prison environment prevails. Now, Mr. McGee handles exactly the same point very comfortably by saying addicts pose a management problem not unfamiliar to correctional authorities, but one which clashes with modern progressive mental health concepts. I suspect that these 2 differences in viewpoint will probably lead to differences in program. I do not say this critically. I hope it is true. I think we are going to learn a good deal more from these programs if they are different and if we can compare them against each other. Since I haven't got a note yet, let me say another thing or two. We're dealing, it's of interest to me that Dr. Maddox wanted to give 2.5 cheers for this, and I also did. We are 2 people who have been engaged in the treatment of addicts. I suspect that those in this audience who have had responsibility for treatment or for management of addicts are more impressed by these proposals than those whose interest has been more academic. I would emphasize these are proposed programs. It was a convention in the Victorian novel for the young lady when she rejected a suitor to add, "But, sir, I shall follow your future career with great interest." For my part, I accept these proposals rather warmly, but still, I shall follow your careers, gentlemen, with great interest.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, normally I would give the speakers a chance for a rebuttal, but I think you can see the notes I've been passing out here, my customary fashion, the time's been marching on. So I believe it's now time to ask for questions from the audience, which you can address to either of the speakers or to any member of the panel. If you do have a question and you're recognized, please give your name and state the question clearly enough for me to hear with my 20 decibel hearing loss, because I want to repeat it back to the audience for the benefit of other people with poor hearing. So we'll now call for questions from the audience. I see a lady over there.
My name is Jean Sisler. My occupation is lawyer.
Jean Sisler, a lawyer.
My question is not specifically a legal one, but I was interested to ask Mr. McGee if at the rehabilitation centers there is any opportunity at all for religious counseling. Are there any ministers or rabbis or priests who are available if the patients or inmates should need them? Are there any opportunities for worship service?
Question is to Mr. McGee, opportunity for religious participation at the California Rehabilitation Center.
Specifically, if so, have you found any response to this? And if not, you feel that there may be a need?
Briefly, the answer is yes. The institution that we received and are rehabilitating for this use has a fine chapel that was there for the service of the Navy, and we have the usual chaplaincy service that we have in all of our institutions. I might ask Roland Wood if there's been any response. Where is he? Yes.
Yes, very definitely. There is a good response to our religious program. We have a full-time Protestant minister, a full-time Catholic priest, and a part-time Jewish rabbi. The rabbi at the present time is servicing our other correctional facilities in the area. Soon we will have our own rabbi, but there has been good response, and it's an integral part of our program. I'm sure Mr. McGee probably would have included it in the interest of time. It may be one of the things that we're eliminating.
Lady?
Senator from San Francisco. One time the gentleman from New York, the New York law was also accompanied by an increase in penalties at the same time with the rehabilitation.
Question is to Dr. Mazelis, was the New York law accompanied by stiffer penalties for criminal actions with respect to narcotics?
I could answer that very simply and say no, but I'd like to take the opportunity to answer a little more broadly, because I think the points that have been made about civil commitment are important points. And the way in which this particular question is approached by the particular agency that works around a civil commitment, I think is a vital matter in terms of our approach to the question of drug addiction. In a general sort of way, we in the Department of Mental Hygiene have attempted to emphasize that it is not our desire to assume a role whereby we counsel courts to make a good guy out of the fellow who comes to the hospital and a bad guy out of the one who doesn't. And hopefully this is not what is going to happen. It's as an integral part of pursuing this particular program is the question of an influence by the Department of Mental Hygiene on people who ordinarily do not give consideration to therapeutic issues as they approach problems which involve and require the need for such consideration. So let me just say that on the books there are no laws, that no penalties that have been increased, but I believe Professor Allen would point out that often this in part is left to the jurisdiction of the court, And the thing that we have tried to do is to encourage everyone, the district attorney, the legal aid society, the judges, and everybody else, not to move around this program in a way to essentially distort it away from what it was intended to be.
Gentleman on the left on the aisle. I can't hear you.
My name is Norman Swern from Santa Monica. I have one question for Mr. McGee. I noticed that an essential difference between the New York and California programs was that, at least in the paper presented here, was that Dr. Mazelis mentioned a program of dissemination of information. This is not apparent in the paper on the California project. Also, my impression of the parallelism between TV and narcotics was that this was not Mr. McGee's opinion, but a legislative opinion on this. I don't know, I like that thought.
There were two questions, I believe. One of these was, question was, did the California law have a clause requiring dissemination of information, education? And secondly, the matter of the simile of addiction to tuberculosis was a legislator's opinion, not Mr. McGee's.
There is no clause in the law providing for dissemination of information, but there are general laws in the government code that provide that all state departments produce annual reports to the governor and the legislature, which are disseminated to public libraries and to certain distributions, so that we certainly are required to make reports. In addition to this, in the amendment to the statute, which is before the legislature as of now, there is provision for an advisory council of 9 members. We didn't copy that from New York. I guess we just hit on the same number, which will have as part of its purpose that of interpreting and explaining and the public, the program to the public, and also serving as a watchdog on us to see to it that our program is what the legislature intended it to be and doesn't retrogress into something else. On the question of the TB matter, yes, I think this is a legislative decision because the California legislature has in the Health and Safety Code a provision that if a tubercular does not accept treatment or remain in the sanitarium when he's supposed to, that he is guilty of a misdemeanor and may be sentenced to jail for 6 months. We have about 40 of them up at Vacaville that we are taking care of. Again, this is a situation where a correctional agency is taking care of a health problem because we have many small counties that can't deal with these individuals. Now, some of these people are borderline mental cases. A good many of them are alcoholics and have tuberculosis, and they just won't stay put, and somebody has to lock them up or they're around spreading TB all over the community. And the people of California consider this a dangerous occupation. I might say, in addition to that, one drug addict making 4 or 5 other drug addicts in his life, which they do, and stealing anything from $30 to $500 worth of merchandise a day is probably more dangerous than a TB.
Gentleman on the left.
I'd like to speak from the point of view of my experience in treatment as a clinical psychologist and take exception with an idea which I heard expressed that it doesn't make any difference why a man is incarcerated. I think it does. It makes all the difference in the world, I think, to be able to tell a man honestly that he's been incarcerated for his own good, as opposed to having to really hide the fact, if you do, I think, that he's been incarcerated for somebody else's good. Speaking from that point of view, and not meaning to be picky with Mr. McGee, I want to pick him up on something that he said. Inmates or patients, whatever you call them. How do you handle a problem in everyday work? What do you call them? And I'd like to also ask the question of Dr. Meiselas, how do you handle that problem?
Did you give us your name?
Stone.
Stone. Question is, directed to both Dr. McGee and Dr. Meiselas, for ask what the occupants of the institutions are called, inmates or patients.
I don't think to begin with that I meant to imply that it doesn't make any difference why they're locked up. I think what I was saying is that as a matter of public policy, it doesn't matter what they are or who they are if the public demands that something be done about it. Now, as far as the patient is concerned, or the person that's so affected, it makes a lot of difference. I agree with that. And it's a practice in the Department of Corrections to call the people in the institutions inmates. We are making some changes in this particular regard and are developing a new set of terminology to be used in connection with our narcotics treatment program, which I think will eliminate that similarity in terminology just for the reasons you expressed.
Gentleman in the front row.
Ex-convict, ex-inmate of one of our California mental institutions, ex-addict, no dope in my veins for quite a few years now. My question is directed to Mr. McGee and also to Dr. Navy. Concerning the mailing and orphan program, I didn't hear any statistics given on this. To me, it's a fear stimuli, but has there been any good come from it to the addicts that have been receiving it on parole? Has the extent of recidivism increased or lessened? And also, with Dr. Mabry, to use this in New York?
So I think we have two questions here. One for Mr. McGee is about relative to the good effects or the lack of effects of the Nalene program. And secondly, we have a question for Dr. Meiselas. He will have two to answer by the time it gets to him. Do they have the Nalene program in New York?
We never regarded the Nalene program as a panacea. There were some people who did, but those of us that had some familiarity with this never did. We regard it, however, as a useful tool, and it has proven a useful tool. And I think rather than my trying to answer that, you have sitting about 5 seats from you there Dr. Hurley, who has been administering this program in the Los Angeles area, and with the permission of the chairman, I would like to have him answer it.
Hurley?
I've been administering this program for 3 years. I'd like to answer the problem too, because it's real hard work. I have a lot of other work that I think probably might be more important 20 years from now. I'd like to get at it sometime. I can only speak with reference to continual contact with the individual subjects who are taking the test, that the test is the most efficient thing that we have at the present time to determine immediately when an individual is recidivistic, when he goes back to the use of drugs. And it is a tool to accomplish this fact. And that's about all that I know that it is at the present time. One thing that I think it has done more than anything else is to give us the capacity to release the addict from the institution to the environment in which he can do something physiologically, sociologically, and psychiatrically, and know that he will be drug-free. And I hope that this is one of the things that it will be used for, if it is used at all, to cut down on the amount of institutionalization that we permit the addict and treat him in exactly the situation in which he became addicted. The reason why I say this is that with the first 100 addicts that we attempted to control in East LA when we started the program in October of 1959. We had these individuals where they originally became addicted, and I can tell you that within 3 months, these 100 fellows, in their response to the anti-narcotic testing program, revolutionized our ideas of what addicts are, physiologically, psychiatrically, and socially. And I think that if we could build a program where the addict could be managed in exactly the setting in which he became addicted, that we could treat it as a disease, and we could have a few things for treatment that would be directed at the condition.
Dr. Mazelos, will you answer 2 questions? First, what do you call tenets of your institutions in New York, and second, an Alene program?
Well, I'm going to answer the second question because that's the easiest one for me to dispose of. We do not have in New York State in anyone's hands an active nailing program. I think the question of determining whether or not people you're following have returned to drug usage is an essential clinical question, and it's one that we've been struggling with a little bit in terms of what would be the most appropriate way of approaching this. There are urine tests, there's nailing. There are certain limitations in our minds in terms of applying this within the context of a therapeutic program. We call the people who come to our hospitals patients, and I might also add that these people who come to our hospitals are seen by us in the prison facilities before they ever begin to move in the direction of our institution, and they are made aware of the fact very early in the game that they're speaking to doctors, and they are going to be patients, and that when they come to our hospitals, that they will be expected to carry themselves as patients in a hospital setting, which requires that they, shall we say, give some consideration to the staff and the surroundings. Now, this is a basic kind of thing, and I might add that in operating within such a framework, we don't find furniture being broken, we don't find any difficulty in interacting with our patients, and I would say that this applies to people who might be classified otherwise than passive dependents. Rather, we have a situation that is rather different from the free-wheeling, no-structure setting, which essentially helps no one because it is chaotic.
I think we have time for just about 2 more questions. Gentleman in the center here.
Dr. Mello, I've say something for McGee. 2 things we forget. One is that...
Will you give us your name, please?
Dr. Mello. We got the program by default. No psychiatric agency will take it. They didn't want it, we took it. The second thing we got to remember is we have no evidence to see that he's doing any less well than anybody else has. We lose sight of that.
Thank you. Was that a question? Gentleman in center in the front.
I'm Dr. Stocker. Sorry. You recognize me? I'm Dr. Stocker, a medical doctor, and my question may not be appropriate, but I've been here for the program, and I've heard about definition of addiction and this discussion about the age of morphine and heroin, and even the addiction of alcohol and nicotine, and on down, but I've not heard anything said about barbiturates or tranquilizers and so on, except in Dr. Way's lecture where he said they use barbiturates as a catalyst for the opium. I should like to ask if anyone can answer what percentage of these people barbiturates, tranquilizers, or other drugs play a part in these individuals that are admitted.
I have a question about, do I understand it correctly, the number of people who are narcotic addicts who also use barbiturates, tranquilizers, and so on? I don't know whether we have that information available, but I'll pass it on. Mr. McGee, Dr. Mazelos.
Well, let me answer first. First, I think it's important to stress that it's difficult to tell what other preparations an individual utilizes, particularly when that preparation does not present one with specific withdrawal symptomatology that can be evaluated. In other words, if an individual utilizes Thorazine periodically, it would be very difficult to tell us, so that one then has to depend upon the reports of the patients one sees. Now, within that context, we see somewhere in the vicinity of about 20–25%, it varies at any given time, who utilize barbiturates in conjunction with the heroin that they buy in the street. Many of the people we see report sporadic usage of stimulants, such as cocaine, Ritalin. We are seeing, the name escapes me just for the moment, the Bambinos.
Bambinos?
Yeah. Oh, well, it's not, no, it's not important. The point is that belonging to the, a block of this kind, the point is that these belong to the dexedrine group, but these are very difficult to pin down because when the patient comes in, he doesn't necessarily show anything that allows you to know just exactly to what extent these preparations are utilized.
I might add just one thing. I think we have the same experience that you do with respect to the mixing of uses and substitute uses and this kind of thing. I have recently asked the Department of the Youth Authority, which is in my agency, to make a spot check on what is going on with respect to arrests for illegal use and possession of so-called dangerous drugs other than the narcotic and marijuana group. I have those figures on my desk, and it will be published in some kind of a report in the next few weeks. May I say this, that this is for people under 18 years of age, because here we're concerned with youth again. Heroin arrests are remaining about the same and have dropped off a little bit in the last 5 years for this age group. Very few of them. The numbers are very small. Marijuana arrests have come down just like that in most of the jurisdictions, especially in the city of Los Angeles. Arrests for dangerous drugs have gone up conversely in the other direction. In the last 5 years have increased about 11.5 times. So the increasing use of these dangerous drugs by people under 18 years of age is now the alarming thing that people are going to get hysterical about next unless something is done about controlling them.
Gentleman in the center, I've been trying to recognize for a long time.
I'm Howard Zellifer, an MD, surgeon, private practice in Las Vegas, Nevada. We have a problem, too. I'm not the living epitome of Horatio Alger, who says, it's at first you don't see, try again, but I did want to get a minute on the floor here to ask a couple of questions. My two colleagues who have just asked questions have broken the ice for me, so I shall jump in with my fur coat on and know this a little different. I would like to know, when I came down here, I felt that, I hoped that there would be something in the conference that would tell those of us who aren't on the firing line, so to speak, of narcotic problems, what to do for the poor person, male and female, who is either not fortunate enough to be able to live in either California or New York, and therefore have a first-class facility. I can't even call it an institution. A first-class facility for entering as a patient to be taken care of with medical therapy. Or is he still fortunate enough to be able to go to a private physician who wants to help him with his problem with the newest therapy? I know about withdrawal. Yes, we just don't give him as much narcotics as he had in hopes that in time he'll be off of it and never go back. I would like to know, and I ask any gentleman on the panel or anyone else who is here and interested, does psychotherapy, post-hypnotic suggestion, help in the withdrawal or after the withdrawal? Are there any other drugs that we haven't spoken about that are useful to us in our armamentarium of taking care of these people? I'm delighted to know that we have conditioned rats who are going to lead us to a solution. Now, I mean that sincerely. That's not a joke. But we've got a lot of conditioned two-legged rats that need help, and I don't know what to do for them. And I would like to have one or two therapeutic suggestions as to how to take care of the unfortunate people who can't go to a good facility in New York or California.
Fortunately, we have an expert on treatment. I'm going to refer this one to Dr. Maddox.
Well, you're asking about available first-class institutions. I don't know whether you would so classify the public health service hospitals in Fort Worth and Lexington, but they are accepting voluntary patients all the time, and all that's required for a patient to get into one hospital or the other is to send in a little one-page application form. Actually, most of the patients admitted to those two hospitals are voluntary patients. Now, some of the other questions, does psychotherapy help? Well, sure, psychotherapy helps some addict patients, and some addict patients are not able to use it. I have in mind the instance of a young physician who came into the Lexington Hospital, how long, 8 or 9 years ago now, who had started taking meperidine because he had a phobia which was becoming increasingly more intense and widespread and handicapping him in his work. And he was quite aware that he was taking the drug to try to keep his phobia under control. He started in intensive psychotherapy in the hospital. He was in the hospital for a year and a half, I guess, and then continued his psychotherapy for several years after that. And essentially, his phobia became relieved. And sure, there are many other patients who have specific psychological troubles and are motivated. I have 1 minute more?
No, just no.
Oh. Thank you. Now, what was I saying? So sure, there are patients who can be helped by psychotherapy depending on what kind of problem they have and what's their motivation. I could add, in response to this question, and jumping back on something that Dr. Chine said a few minutes ago, about the patient who does not perceive that he has a problem. He perceives that he has a monkey on his back that ought to be taken off, or he perceives that he has bad companions, or that he perceives that the probation officer was picking on him. And one of the tasks of treatment of this person is to help him to internalize the problem. And this is done regularly and actively by the psychiatrists and psychologists and caseworkers and others at the Lexington and Fort Worth hospitals. At least we try to. I wasn't sure that Dr. Chine is aware that this is seen as really as a major component of treatment of patients who don't feel that they have a problem. But what an addict patient needs in therapy, whether it's against the grain confrontation and development of what I've called outsight instead of insight, or whether it's psychotherapy or whether it's something else, depends entirely on the person. To be eligible for admission to the Fort Worth or Lexington hospitals, the patient has to be addicted to an opiate or to one of the specified synthetic narcotic drugs. We can't admit people who are addicted only to a barbiturate or only to alcohol.
Time for one more question. I'm going to recognize Dr. Disler.
How would you protect society and individual
question is addressed to Dr. Chine and Mr. Allen, and it's how would they protect society?
They don't want to jeopardize individual rights against arrest or deprivation of liberty. How are we going to stop them?
This is the balance between individual rights and society's rights.
Well, that's a nice little question to knock the evening off, it seems to me. I have understood my role here to be delightfully irresponsible. I was called upon to comment on current tendencies in the legislation and practice in this field. And when I was asked what kind of paper I had prepared, I said it has something in it for everyone to hate. And that in general is my posture. Let me say, I don't know that what I would do is of any interest to anyone but me. I must say that it would seem rather clear to me that we are confronted with a situation that requires great caution. I would not tomorrow advise the repeal of all narcotics legislation. I would not tomorrow put out of business every hospital to which civil commitment is now authorized. I would think that it would be wise that our legal approach to this problem be sufficiently flexible to permit experimentation with a variety of devices, including, I may say, compulsory commitment. But what I would be very much concerned with is the placing of great numbers of eggs in that basket at this particular moment. I am talking here about tendencies which may, in fact, in administration of these programs not be realized. But I think they may be, and I would much prefer to see a program in New York with 50 beds than 500, to be frank, at this particular stage of the game. There are other alternatives, and I should think that our modification of existing law might very well be directed along the line to experiment with ambulatory treatment as compared with institutional treatment. And after a while, I'd like to see what happened. Having now said more than I intended to, I think I will lapse into a dignified silence.
I tried yesterday in Panel B to demonstrate that this is not a problem which is of such magnitude or of such a character that society does in fact need protection, except in the sense that society generates the consequences from which it needs protection. I won't have the time to outline a program of treatment. I can give it to you in one sentence, at least the negative side of this, and that is that the only thing that I can see that's relevant is, to start with, is for the law to get out of the business of prescribing treatment.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think that concludes the discussion. I've been asked to try to summarize the conference, which I will do in one sentence, that I came here, I think, sophisticated in this area to the extent that I realize how ignorant I am. I am leaving in the same situation. We have been in this conference from London to Hong Kong via New York, Texas, Kentucky, and California. And as I surmised before I came here, we remain in doubt about most of the issues before us. We remain still in desperate need of basic information in every one of the areas with which we're concerned in narcotic addiction. I am very pleased, however, to see a beginning change in the climate of public opinion, and I personally give 2 cheers, or 2.5, or almost 3 cheers for the new programs in New York State and in California, because they represent, if nothing else, a change from a purely penalistic approach to something that we can now begin to call more like treatment, so that perhaps we're at the beginning of an evolutionary process here that may occur slowly. I'm also very pleased, especially to hear that these programs, which really are being forced upon us, what Mr. Allen said, that we should have a unit of 50 beds and find out what to do, is perfectly lovely, and this would be my idea of how to go about it, and it's a perfectly reasonable idea, but the public is demanding action now and says we must do it now, so we must go along with the public. We have no alternative. They pass the laws after all. And then we must try to evaluate what we are doing. And the idea that we're getting some evaluation here in California and in New York State gives my spirits quite a lift. And I think on that note, I'll close the meeting, except to say that I thank for the audience, and I thank for all the panelists, Dr. Wilner and the UCLA for the opportunity to be here and participate with you and interchange with you on this most difficult problem, or rather, this most difficult set of problems.
You're a darn good show. If I were a moderator,